In the world of medals and uniforms, where every ribbon tells a story, and every gesture is calculated for control, there are no surprises. At least that's what General Ruiz believed. He had faced war. He had faced betrayal. He had outlived enemies and buried secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. But nothing, not even his years commanding Black Ops missions, prepared him for her. She wasn't a soldier. She didn't belong on that stage. And yet, with a single quiet movement of her wrist, she shattered every illusion he had built. Not with a weapon, not with a word, but with a mark. A tattoo he was never meant to see again. A mark from a past unit he helped bury. A past he thought was dead. Until now. Because some wars don't end on the battlefield. Some come back, wearing a camera and a smile. The hall gleamed with formality. Gold trim on polished uniforms, brass buttons aligned in perfect order. The rhythmic march of boots against marble. It was a celebration of structure, of hierarchy, of control. General Ruiz stood beneath the crest of the armed forces, his medals catching the light like frozen fire. Applause echoed as he approached the podium. Cameras clicked. Cadets stood to attention. Every moment rehearsed, every word pre-approved. This was his world. A world where chaos bowed to discipline, and history was written by men in perfect formation. And yet, as he scanned the room, something caught. Not in the front row, not among the decorated ranks, but just beyond the media line. A civilian, young, unassuming, holding a camera. Her presence wasn't unusual. Official photographers were always assigned. But it was the way she stood. Still, balanced, as if she wasn't just capturing the moment, but watching him. He didn't know why her gaze unsettled him. Not yet. He returned to his speech. But the syllables felt heavier, as if someone had turned down the oxygen in the room. And then, it happened. As she raised her lens, the sleeve of her jacket shifted ever so slightly. Just enough for him to see it. A line. A coil. Ink on pale skin, unmistakable in its design. A serpent, entwined with an anchor. His breath caught. His mouth froze mid-sentence. The room kept clapping. But for him time stood completely still. It should have been a passing glance. A minor slip of fabric. Nothing more. But in General Ruiz's world, there were no coincidences. And that tattoo. It wasn't just familiar. It was forbidden. The serpent and anchor, a symbol struck from every military archive. A shadow unit disavowed. A name erased. A chapter meant to remain closed. Yet here it was inked plainly on the wrist of a stranger. And then she looked at him. Not startled. Not apologetic. Just calm. Measured. Almost expectant. Like someone waiting for him to remember something he had spent decades trying to forget. The applause faded into the background. Words fell away from his speech. All he heard now was his heartbeat, deliberate, heavy. He broke eye contact. Tried to continue. Cleared his throat. But he couldn't shake it. That feeling of being seen. Not as a general. Not as a hero. But as a man with blood on his past. And secrets still breathing beneath his uniform. Who was she? How did she know? And why now, why here? He glanced back. She was gone. As if her presence was never meant for the camera, but for him alone. And in that quiet absence, something inside him shifted. The general who had spent his life commanding silence had just been unraveled by a woman who never said a word. That night, the general sat alone in his study, the lights dimmed, the ceremony medal still resting on the table. He hadn't touched his drink. He hadn't spoken since returning. Only one thought echoed in his mind. She knows. But what did she know exactly? Who had told her? His fingers moved without instruction, unlocking a drawer he hadn't opened in years. Inside, a rusted tin box. Its contents, a torn patch, a photo faded with time, and a folded report, sealed and stamped, classified/level red. He unfolded it slowly. Operation Sombra Occulta. The mission that never existed. The unit with no roster, no medals, no graves. But he had led it. And she had been there. A child. Barely 15. Rescued from a rebel outpost, or so the report claimed. But there had always been something more. Something off. They had called her Asset M. No name. No history. Just silence, and eyes that watched everything. And now she'd returned. Same eyes. But with a message, unspoken yet deafening. He searched her face again in the group photo. The resemblance was clear. Not a stranger. Not a coincidence. She wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was the proof that it had never truly ended. And worse, she was here. She wasn't alone. The serpent tattoo wasn't just a mark. It was a signal. One of them had returned, which meant others might follow. The next morning, General Ruiz gave no orders. He made no mention of the woman nor the tattoo. But deep inside military archives, beneath layers of redacted code, he began searching. Not for files, for ghosts. Asset M had vanished without a trace after the collapse of Unidad Sombra. But there had been others. Codename Viento. Codename Tracy. Codename Cobra. Men and women trained in silence, used for operations the world never knew. When the project ended, they were abandoned. Some disappeared. Others were silenced. And one had survived in secret. Coordinates appeared in a decrypted footnote. Northern coast. Civilian name, Mateo Rojas. A fisherman. No criminal record. No digital trace. But the general knew that name. Rojas had once saved his life. And paid for it with his identity. That night, under the guise of personal leave, General Ruiz left the capital for the coast. No convoy. No security detail. Just questions he never thought he'd ask. When he found Mateo, he was older, thinner, but unmistakable. The way he moved, the way he watched. They sat in silence for minutes. Until Ruiz finally asked, "Is she one of us?" Mateo didn't nod. He simply looked out to sea and said, "She's not part of the unit anymore. She is the unit now." Ruiz's hands clenched. "What does she want?" Mateo looked back at him, a calm, unsettling gaze. "Justice. For what you buried. Not for revenge, General. For truth." Pause. "She's not hunting you. She's waking you up." And just like that, the question shifted. Ruiz no longer wondered what was coming. He wondered whether he still had time to decide which side he was truly on. The sun had barely risen when Ruiz returned from the coast. No rest. No report. Just a message waiting at his door, unmarked envelope, no handwriting. Inside, a photo of him 27 years ago, standing in the jungle. A blurred figure behind his shoulder, eyes sharp, young, forgotten. And on the back, "You still remember the coordinates." Midnight. He didn't hesitate. That night, dressed not in uniform but in a plain coat, he followed the signal to an abandoned train depot outside the city. Empty. Still. Until a quiet step echoed from the shadows. She emerged slowly. Calm. Confident. The tattoo no longer hidden. But this time he didn't flinch. He looked into her eyes and said, "Why bring me here?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. Instead, she placed a small device on the crate between them. A drive. Labeled only with a single word, remnants. "These are the missions they said never happened," she said softly. "Files you thought were burned. Proof of what we did. Of what was done to us." He didn't touch it. "You think I'll leak it?" he asked. Her reply was colder than anger. "I think you still have a soul." Silence. And then, for the first time since the ceremony, she stepped closer. "I'm not here to expose you," she whispered. "I'm here to ask you, before the lies write the final page, will you write the truth?" And with that she turned. Left him standing alone. With the past in his hands. And a future that only he could choose to change. For the first time in decades, General Ruiz didn't report to the ministry. He didn't stand at the head of command. Instead, he sat in silence. In his private study, staring at the flickering screen. File after file. Names he barely remembered. Coordinates. Audio logs. Faces of operatives listed only by code name. Ghosts reduced to footnotes. Asset M, survived biochemical exposure. Tracy, terminated in crossfire. Mission not confirmed. Viento, unresponsive after extraction. Reports he'd once authorized. And beneath them the signatures. His words. His silence. His obedience. For decades, he had believed that what they buried was for national security. That loyalty meant forgetting. That peace required someone else to carry the scars. But now, those scars had names. And voices. And one of them had found hers again. The military had made him a symbol of discipline. But in his reflection now, he saw something colder. A man who chose order over truth. And yet, within that regret, something sparked. Question. Could honor begin, not by defending the past, but by correcting it? He stood. Walked to the old ceremonial box that held his medals. Removed each one. Not in shame, but in preparation. Tomorrow he would return to headquarters. Not to salute the silence, but to break it. The press room had never been this quiet. Rows of reporters, high-ranking officials, and stunned junior officers stared at the man behind the podium. General Ruiz. Without his medals. Without his polished speech. Just a single envelope in his hand. "Before I begin," he said, voice calm but clear, "I ask that no one stand for me today." Murmurs stirred. The protocol officer looked uncertain. But no one moved. "I have come to speak not as your general," he continued, "but as a man who once believed silence was a form of loyalty." He placed the envelope on the podium. "Inside this file are records that were hidden, operations that never made it into our history books. People we used and erased." A beat of silence. "They were called assets. We gave them numbers instead of names. But I remember their faces. One of them stood before me days ago, not to accuse, but to ask whether I still remembered what it meant to serve something greater than myself." He paused, looked out across the crowd. "Some will say I've broken ranks today, that I've betrayed an oath. But I believe the greater betrayal is to wear a uniform stitched with silence." Behind him, a large screen lit up, not with logos or emblems, but with faces. Blurry, black and white, some barely visible. The forgotten. "If there is any honor in me," he said, voice softening, "it must begin here, by making sure they are forgotten no more." He stepped back. No applause. No fanfare. Just quiet. And in the back of the room, a young woman lowered her camera. Not to record, but to witness. In the end, the most powerful men are not those who command silence, but those who dare to break it. General Ruiz could have remained a decorated symbol. A name etched in metals, not in memory. But when confronted by the past he buried, he chose not to run, not to deny, but to remember. And in doing so, he gave voice to the voiceless. He reminded us that truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always finds its way back. That even in institutions built on control, conscience still has the power to speak. And sometimes, the most important battles are not fought on the battlefield, but within ourselves. As the cameras faded, and the headlines changed, one truth remained. Some shadows are not meant to stay hidden, and some names must finally be remembered.